When I first moved out to that quiet little patch of land on the edge of town, I never imagined I'd end up in a war over a road. My property was about 10 acres of wooded land with a single private gravel road that I had personally paid to have built. It connected my driveway to the main county road, winding through a stretch of land that had been part of an old logging route decades earlier. It wasn't much to look at, just gravel, trees, and the occasional muddy rut after a storm, but it was mine. Every stone, every bend, every inch of it was recorded in the deed. For years, it was peaceful. I maintained the road myself, clearing branches, fixing washouts, and even adding a small wooden sign at the entrance that read "Private Drive, no public access." I didn't think twice about it until the HOA from the newly built subdivision down the hill decided my road was suddenly theirs to use. It started one morning when I came home from a weekend trip to find a shiny new sign posted right at the entrance to my road. It read, "Community Access Road, HOA Maintenance Area." I thought it was a mistake. Surely, someone had mixed up the boundaries. But as I drove up toward my cabin, I noticed fresh tire tracks more than usual. When I reached the top, I found two SUVs parked halfway up the road, their owners unloading mountain bikes and chatting like they were at a park. I asked them what they were doing, and one of them, a guy wearing a polo shirt with the HOA logo on it, said, "We're using the new community trail. The HOA just opened it up." I told him politely that there was no community trail and that this was my private property. He smirked and said, "Not anymore. It's maintained by the HOA now. Check the new map." That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake, it was a takeover. The next day, I walked down to their neighborhood office. A woman named Cheryl, the HOA president, greeted me with that kind of forced smile that tells you she's already decided she's right. I explained that the road was privately owned and that I had the deed to prove it. She barely looked up from her computer and said, "Our development plan includes access rights for the road. It's for community safety and connectivity." I asked if she'd ever actually looked at the property records, and she said, "We had our survey team review it. It's within the easement area." I told her that was impossible, there was no recorded easement on my land. Her smile didn't fade. "Well, if you believe there's been a mistake," she said in that syrupy HOA tone, "you're welcome to bring your documentation to our next board meeting." I left before I said something I'd regret. That night, I dug through my files until I found the original property plat and deed transfer documents. The road had been part of the purchase, and the boundaries were crystal clear. I even had the original permit from when I paid to have it graded and resurfaced. There was no easement, no shared access, nothing. The next day, I drove down to the county records office and met with an old friend who worked in land management. When I showed him the HOA's new community plan, he frowned immediately. "They didn't get this approved," he said. "They just redrew your road onto their map. It's completely illegal." He stamped a certified copy of my property records and handed it to me. "This will shut them up quick," he said. I thanked him and drove home, ready for round two. When I showed up at the HOA meeting, they were already in full swing, discussing landscaping budgets and pool repairs. Cheryl looked surprised to see me. I waited until they opened the floor for comments and then laid the certified deed copies on the table. "This is my road," I said evenly. "It's on my property, not yours. You don't have any legal access, and if anyone keeps trespassing, I'll treat it as such." For a moment, the room went quiet. Then one of the board members, some smug guy with a Bluetooth earpiece, said, "We've had our legal team review this, and they disagree." I smiled. Good. Then they can explain it to the county judge. I gathered my papers and left before anyone could say another word. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. The next morning, I found orange paint markings all along the road and little survey flags sticking out of the dirt. A sign had been staked near the entrance, "Future HOA Improvement Project." That was it. I'd had enough. I called my lawyer and explained the situation. He laughed and said, "You're in the right. Let us make sure they never pull this again." Together, we drafted a cease and desist notice and filed a formal complaint with the county. I also had my lawyer send a certified letter to the HOA demanding immediate removal of all signage, survey flags, and unauthorized materials. Then, just to drive the point home, I ordered a new metal gate for the road's entrance. When the gate arrived, I installed it myself, solid steel, key code lock, and a camera mounted on top. I placed a new sign right beside it: "Private property, access restricted, trespassers will be towed." It felt good locking that gate for the first time. Within hours, I got an angry email from Cheryl demanding that I remove the obstruction or face community penalties. I didn't even respond. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door from a deputy sheriff. Cheryl had actually called the police, claiming I was blocking a public access road. The deputy and I walked down together, and I showed him the deed, the county certification, and the filed complaint. He looked at me, then at her, and said, "Ma'am, this is private property. You're trespassing." I swear, the color drained from her face. After that, things escalated quickly. The county fined the HOA for unauthorized construction activity and warned them to stay off my property. Cheryl tried to rally the neighborhood against me, claiming I was being uncooperative and hostile to community progress. But when I shared the official documents and the sheriff's report with a few of the residents, the truth spread fast. Most of them didn't even know the HOA had tried to take the road. They were furious at her for risking legal trouble and wasting their dues. Within a month, Cheryl was voted out as president. With her gone, the board backed down completely. They removed all signage, sent me a written apology, and agreed to never claim access to my road again. I even made a deal with the new president to allow emergency vehicles temporary access if needed, just to keep the peace. Still, I couldn't resist one final touch. I had the road resurfaced and installed a motion-triggered gate that opened only for vehicles with my approved code. Now, when I drive home at night, I watch that gate close behind me and smile. The HOA thought they could take what wasn't theirs, but all they did was remind me why I bought this land in the first place, to be left alone. They can keep their manicured lawns and fancy bylaws. I've got my road, my cabin, and my peace, and that's worth more than anything their community could ever offer. After the fiasco with the HOA trying to claim my private road, I honestly thought they'd learned their lesson. They'd been embarrassed publicly, fined by the county, and their precious president had been ousted after her own neighbors realized how reckless she'd been. For a few peaceful months, I believed that was the end of it. The new HOA board even sent me a written apology, promising to respect my property lines and work collaboratively moving forward. I didn't trust them, but I accepted the gesture. I kept to myself, maintained my land, and enjoyed the sound of gravel under my tires each morning when I drove down my road to town. But people in power, especially those who've tasted control, don't give up that easily. They just look for a different angle. And I should known that the HOA wasn't done trying to push me around. The next time they struck, it wasn't with a fake map or false claim. This time, it was with something more personal. It began one Friday morning when I went out to leave for work and found my truck missing. At first, I thought it had been stolen, but when I checked the ground, I saw the familiar chalk marks from a towing company. I called the number printed faintly in the dirt and sure enough, they confirmed my vehicle had been impounded. Violation of community parking regulations, the guy on the phone said. I nearly laughed out loud. Community parking, buddy, this is private land. There's no community here. He sounded unconcerned and said, you'll need to take that up with the HOA that requested the tow. My blood boiled. They'd actually done it again, only this time, they'd taken my vehicle off my own driveway. I drove my old backup Jeep to the impound lot, and when I arrived, the attendant gave me a smirk that told me everything I needed to know. Oh yeah, this one's been a hot topic, he said. Apparently, your HOA has been making all kinds of calls this week. I handed him the paperwork proving my property was outside HOA jurisdiction, and he sighed. Figures. You can take it up with management, but for now, you'll have to pay the release fee. $700 later, I was back in possession of my truck, but I was furious. I stopped by the HOA office that same afternoon, and as soon as I walked in, the new president, a nervous-looking guy named Todd, jumped up like he'd seen a ghost. This wasn't me, he blurted out before I even said a word. Karen's old crew is still giving orders behind the scenes. I swear, I didn't approve that tow. Apparently, a few of the previous board members had stayed on after Karen left, and they were quietly trying to regain control. I demanded that he call the towing company and issue a written retraction. He nodded immediately, apologizing profusely, and promised to handle it. But even as he spoke, I could tell there was more to the story. Todd wasn't the problem, he was just the face they'd put in front to make it seem like the HOA had changed. The real culprits were still hiding in the background, using their influence to harass me. So, I decided it was time to fight back, but not in the way they expected. That weekend, I paid a visit to an old friend, Rick, who happened to run the county impound lot. We'd gone to school together, and over the years, I'd helped him out with a few land access issues on his property. When I told him what happened, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. So they're towing cars off your property now, that's bold. I handed him a copy of my deed and the sheriff's report from the last time the HOA crossed the line. He grinned and said, I think I can help. He made a few calls right then and there. Within a day, I had standing authorization filed with the county to control any vehicles parked on my road or property without permission. In other words, I could tow their cars legally and fast. Rick also gave me the contact information for a towing company under contract with the sheriff's office. These guys don't take orders from HOAs, he said. They take orders from property owners. 2 days later, the HOA made their next move without realizing the game had changed. I woke up early Monday morning to find 3 cars lined up along my road, 2 sedans and a pickup, all with HOA parking permits hanging in the window. It looked deliberate, like they were trying to make a point. Maybe they wanted to show that the road was still community property. Instead of losing my temper, I smiled. I made one phone call, and within an hour, 2 tow trucks were pulling up the gravel path. The drivers worked efficiently, documenting everything with photos before hauling the vehicles away. When the HOA members came outside later that morning and found their cars missing, the neighborhood lit up with shouting. Phones started ringing, and I knew my plan had worked perfectly. By noon, Todd called me, his voice shaky. Did you tow their cars? He asked. They're all here in my office yelling. I said calmly, I didn't tow anything that wasn't parked illegally on private land. You have the records. He was silent for a few moments before saying, "They're saying you can't do that." I chuckled. "They said the same thing about my road, remember, turns out I can." The best part came later that afternoon when the same HOA members stormed down to the sheriff's office to file a complaint, only to find out that my towing orders were filed directly with the county and signed off by law enforcement. Every vehicle had been towed under legal authority, not some HOA regulation. When they realized that, the fight went out of them completely. The sheriff himself told them, "Maybe next time, don't park on land you don't own." That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset over my land, I could hear the faint sound of arguments drifting from the HOA neighborhood down the hill. The rebellion within their ranks was finally starting. Homeowners were furious about paying fines and fees for other people's mistakes, and the board was fracturing from the inside. By the end of the week, 2 more members resigned, citing toxic community relations. Todd sent me another message apologizing and promising to put everything in writing, this time a permanent clause recognizing that neither the road nor any connected property fell under HOA control. I agreed to sign it, with one condition: they also had to reimburse me for the tow fees from my truck. He didn't argue. The HOA quietly paid up. After that, I barely saw any of them again. The road stayed clear, the signs stayed down, and the new leadership seemed determined to stay out of my way. But every once in a while, I'd see Karen's old allies driving past my gate, glaring up the hill, probably wondering how everything had flipped on them so completely. The truth was simple: they tried to use authority, intimidation, and paperwork to bully me, but I used the one thing they couldn't fight back against: the law. My property was mine, my road was mine, and now, even the very ground their tires touched was subject to my permission. And that, more than anything, drove them crazy. The morning they realized every single HOA car was gone was the most peaceful morning I'd had in months. The sun had just started to rise, fog curling through the valley, when I walked out onto my porch with a cup of coffee and looked down the hill toward the neighborhood. My cameras had picked up the commotion before I even heard it: people running around, waving their arms, voices carrying through the cool air like a chorus of panic. I knew exactly what had happened. The night before, after weeks of harassment and property disputes, I finally decided to make my point once and for all. Every HOA board member who parked their car along my private road, in my turnouts, or near my access gate, had found a tow notice taped to their windshield earlier that week. Most of them ignored it, smugly assuming I was bluffing. They'd gotten used to treating my property as theirs. But what they didn't know was that the paperwork was already filed, the sheriff's approval already stamped, and my friend Rick's team ready to go at dawn. By 5:30 a.m. the first tow truck had rolled in. By sunrise, not a single HOA vehicle remained. As I stood there watching the chaos unfold, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. These people had spent months trying to break me down, trespassing, towing my truck, blocking my road, threatening legal action. They acted like the HOA was untouchable, as if their self-written community bylaws gave them power over everyone. But now the tables had turned, and they were finally experiencing what it felt like to have someone use the system properly and legally against them. I wasn't hiding in the shadows or sneaking around. I'd done everything by the book. They just never thought I'd be smart enough, patient enough, or connected enough to pull it off. I watched one of the HOA members, a guy named Brian who had been the loudest of them all, pacing in his driveway, phone pressed to his ear. His shiny black SUV was one of the first to go. He was yelling something about unauthorized towing and filing a lawsuit. A few doors down, another board member was inspecting tire tracks on the road like a detective, as if that would somehow change the fact that she parked on land she didn't own. Within half an hour, several of them had gathered at the HOA clubhouse, and I knew the meeting they were about to have wouldn't be friendly. The best part was, I didn't even need to lift a finger anymore. The paperwork, the legal documents, the county permits, all of it was airtight. Even if they called the cops, there was nothing law enforcement could do because I'd worked directly with them from the start. Sure enough, around mid-morning, 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled into the neighborhood. I didn't even bother going down there, I knew exactly what was happening. The HOA was trying to make it look like I'd committed theft, hoping they could pressure the deputies into forcing me to release the vehicles. But when the sheriff's deputy looked up the case numbers, he found the authorizations filed under my name, approved by his own department. I later heard from one of the tow drivers that the look on Karen's old assistant's face, she was still hanging around despite no longer being on the board, was priceless. The deputy told them plainly, "You can't park on land that doesn't belong to you." End of story. That was the end of their little scene right there. They shuffled back to their homes, humiliated, some of them still on the phone trying to figure out how they were going to get their cars back. By afternoon, the impound yard was overflowing with HOA vehicles. I got a call from Rick, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "You weren't kidding about a lot of cars," he said. "They've been calling non-stop, trying to get us to waive the release fees." I told him to treat them just like anyone else. "No special treatment," I said. "They can pay the same towing and storage costs I had to pay when they took my truck." He agreed without hesitation. It was poetic, just as simple, legal, and completely fair. They made me spend $700 to get my own vehicle back when I'd done nothing wrong. Now, collectively, they were paying nearly $5,000 to retrieve theirs. Later that evening, Todd, the current HOA president, called me. His tone was weary, defeated. "They're furious," he said. "I told them you were within your rights, but they won't listen." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He'd been trying to hold the group together ever since Karen's downfall, but it was falling apart faster than he could manage. "Todd," I said calmly, "I've told you from the start I don't want trouble. I just want my land respected. The road, the turnouts, the gate, it's all mine, and I'm tired of playing defense. If they touch so much as a single inch of it again, I'll start pressing charges instead of towing." He didn't argue. In fact, he sounded almost relieved that someone else was finally taking control of the situation. "I'll put out a notice," he said. "No HOA member is to use or access your property for any reason. Ever." A few days passed quietly after that. Cars reappeared one by one, freshly released from impound, but they never parked near my land again. The once busy HOA road that used to be full of members walking their dogs, riding bikes, and taking shortcuts across my property now stood completely empty. Even the mail carriers stopped using it, redirecting through the main neighborhood entrance. It was eerie but satisfying. For the first time in years, my road was truly mine again, quiet, peaceful, untouched. I took the opportunity to fix the fencing, install new signs, and even line part of the road with gravel and wooden posts to mark the boundary clearly. It wasn't about intimidation anymore, it was about setting things right. The funny thing was, once the HOA realized they couldn't bully me anymore, other homeowners in the area started reaching out to me privately. A few confessed that they'd been against the HOA's behavior all along but had been too afraid to speak up. One older gentleman even thanked me, saying the HOA had been overstepping for years, fining residents for trivial things like mailbox colors and lawn lengths. My battle, it turned out, had opened their eyes to how much control they'd willingly given away. The board eventually voted to replace half of its members, and Todd finally had a chance to lead without Karen's old allies undermining him. As for me, I stayed out of their affairs. My focus was on maintaining my land and keeping my boundaries respected. The whole ordeal taught me that standing up to people like that requires more than anger. It requires patience, precision, and a willingness to play their own game better than they do. They tried to use fake rules and intimidation. I used documentation, the law, and calm persistence. And in the end, it wasn't a shouting match or confrontation that beat them. It was the quiet sound of tow trucks rolling out before dawn, taking back the peace they'd stolen from me. Sometimes, when I drive down that same road now, I still catch glimpses of a few HOA members peering out from their windows, their expressions unreadable. Maybe they still resent me. Maybe they've learned something. Either way, I don't care. Because as the sunlight filters through the trees and hits the gravel path just right, I'm reminded of one simple truth: they took my road without asking, but in the end, I took back everything they thought they owned.